All right. So I typed a little thing out here. All right. What made me want to discuss this topic? Like Duncan Hollis, the Denver communists see the importance of organizing as key to our success at transforming society. This essay discusses many trends we see in Denver communists, as I'm sure others see in their areas. I will primarily be focusing on the West, since that is the location of our struggle and it is the center for the economic stranglehold on the globe. It is important to understand the working class of the West because its economic trends have isolated and fractured the movement. Uh, in most places around the world, even though capitalist an organization, there is a level of class consciousness among their workers. Since I started organizing with Denver Communists, some of the major pushback and apprehensions we have seen or received are the anti-organization stance, anti-communist stance, and anti-theory stance. It's important to discuss these topics so we can clearly state our organizational goal and why it's important, as well as dispel misinformation and miseducation that this country has thrust upon us with real educational foundations to combat reactionary ideas. Duncan Hollis opens his essay with the event of the last 40 years largely isolated the revolutionary socialist tradition from the working class of the West. The first problem is to reintegrate them. Even though this article is from 1971, we can see then, as we do now, that capitalist policy has ransacked the revolutionary movement in the West. Reaganism and Thatcherism, in particular, placed a knockout blow when it ushered in neoliberalism and globalization, which fractured the working class movement and set it on course with isolation and reactionary views. If we look at the last year, we saw a plethora of movements start to gain movement around COVID, the George Floyd uprisings, rent and mortgage freezes, higher wages, workers' protection, eviction stops, homeless support, anti-police, immigration rights, the resurgence of Free Palestine movement, among others. These actions are great for sparking consciousness among the masses, but in order for them to truly be effective at changing a system, they have to be organized. Like a steam engine, this fervor for change has to be harnessed in order to explode the movement forward. As Duncan Hollis states, the many partial and localized struggles on wages, conditions, housing, rent, education, health, and so on have to be coordinated and unified into a coherent forward movement based on strategy for the transformation of society. What Duncan means by this and what the DC tries to emphasize in the organizing is that BLM is free Palestine, is free or is workers' rights, is higher wages, is homeless support. These are all interconnected struggles, not just here, but internationally, as well as our internationally as well. These are all working class struggles. That is why we believe that the first thing in the West we must do is reintegrate the working class's consciousness. How do we do this? In DC, we believe in order to do this, we must re-educate ourselves through revolutionary and socialist education and understand how this is applied to our current situations, aka theory. We also meet the working class where they are. Working class struggles do not always have to be organized on a shop floor. In fact, in this day and age, most radicals come by way of social movement and then make the connection to their work. The days of labor organizing coming first, then the realization of social movements unfortunately died when neoliberalism came due to its ability to alienate workers in a completely new way. Think about how you came to radical politics. Just because organizing does not happen at a workplace and instead happens at protests does not mean that participants are not workers. They absolutely are. Duncan states, in human terms, an organized layer of thousands of workers by hand and by brain, firmly rooted amongst their fellow workers and with a shared consciousness of the necessary for socialism and the way to achieve it has to be created. What Duncan is saying is that any realization of the need for socialism is a workers' movement, essentially, Uh, it's a movement for emancipation, and its success depends on masses of us being being aligned with a clear goal or organized. As previously stated, we often hear the anti-organization and anti-communist stance. These are logical responses and reactions, especially in the West. When Westerners hear the term communist, no matter if they are leftist adjacent or not, there's a reaction to it. I argue that a lot of this, again, due to the miseducation we have received, or is due to the miseducation we have received. I will not argue that Stalin wasn't a piece of shit or that Mao took a sharp turn. They are not communists in practice, only in name. Unfortunately, they are the face of the West is tied to socialism. These individuals and the movement that followed them pacified the international struggle for human liberation and approached socialism from a top-down approach, not a bottom-up. What does this mean? Top-down organizing is a singular individual who represents the interest of the masses. Bottom-up socialism is a democratic participation from all, not a singular person leading us to socialism. The anti-organization stance is often hurled against socialists because quote unquote, capitalists organize. So we're trying to like beat capitalism, right? Again, I will argue that why capitalism is so successful is due to its organization. Thus, wouldn't it be advantageous for us to also apply or also be highly organized? The answer is yes. A fist is more effective than an open hand in a fight. Yes, we're fighting capitalism, but not organization. Capital organization has created a benefit a few. Social organization is benefited for the many. We can see that these arguments are not new to our project, as Duncan states. Sorry. As it reemerges from the status old, disputes take on new life. The nature of the socialist organization is again an issue. Organizations do not exist in a vacuum. They are composed of actual people in specific historical situations, attempting to solve real problems with a limited number of options open to them. Failure to take adequate account of these rather obvious considerations reduces discussion. If leftists, leftist adjacent, and non-leftists equate organization to Stalin or American democracy, then as Duncan puts it, by this same reason, Jesus Christ was the father of Spanish Inquisition, and Abraham Lincoln was the father of United States imperialism. But nobody, one hopes, imagines that statements of this type lead to any useful conclusions. Statements of this type the question shouldn't be against organization, but rather the makeup of organization, what the intention of that organization is. The anti-organization stance also stems from the idea of organizations having to have a leader, and this leader will ultimately lead to authoritarianism. I won't completely disagree with this. We have seen in the past that a singular decision maker has been disastrous most of the time, not to mention undemocratic. One of the negative features of the leadership/betrayal syndrome is the assumption that the answers of all problems are known in advance. They are contained in a program which is definitive and final. To safeguard the purity of a program is seen as one of the main tasks of the selected few. We at Denver Communists do not see liberation as being led by a select few. We see it as an international struggle with all oppressed driving the movement. We do not pretend to have an answer or blueprint to liberation. This must be developed through collective struggle in present moments and studying of the past. Doing these things sharpen our politics and make us stronger. The special sauce is not a person, it's all of us. This is why in the West especially, we must work to elevate workers' consciousness and organize them. To close out, Victor Serge stated, "It is often said that the germ of socialism was in Bolshevism at its beginning, Well, I have no objection. Only Bolshevism are also contained in many other germs, a mass of other germs. and those who lived through the enthusiasm of the first year of the first victorious revolution ought not forget it. To judge the living man by the death germ which the autopsy reveals in the corpse, and which he may have carried in him since his birth, is that very sensible?